probably already know that. This video is about chaos control, a powerful technique that can accomplish many things. But the thing is, a lot of fans seem to lack an important understanding of it. More specifically, chaos control's need for a chaos emerald or fake emerald. Hi, I'm TI Graphics. Welcome to my first crappy video. I'm a bit awkward, but bear with me and pay more attention to the argument and its points than my terrible speaking skills. Also, this video is not a kid's video. Parental discretion is advised. Oh shit, he's got a gun! You've been warned. Now about chaos control. As I said, chaos control is intrinsically linked to another element within the Sonic series that has been there since the first game, the Chaos Emeralds. And to understand chaos control, you need to understand them. The Chaos Emeralds are 7 jewels that turn thoughts into power. Literally, they turn thoughts into energy, and since people are always thinking, the emeralds can make unlimited energy over time. The Chaos Emeralds also give their energy to all living things, as described in several sources, including the original game's Japanese manual. And their power spreads quite far, covering entire islands like South Island, which moves because of their power. This means their energies can be harnessed without physical contact with any emerald, such as during Chaos Control or when Sonic or Shadow turned super in many games. In one particular instance, in Sonic Unleashed, Sonic uses all 7 emeralds to turn super, while the emeralds are scattered around the massive Gaia Colossus, which, to get a size perspective, Sonic is smaller than its eye. Black Doom also uses a fully powered Chaos Control, meaning powered by all 7 emeralds, to warp the Black Comet to the surface of Sonic's world, yet he never touched any emerald, which were originally floating around Shadow's head. Even the portal to Ifrit's dimension shows the distance is true, as it would only open with all 7 emeralds, but then appeared to open with only 6. This is because the remaining emerald was hidden nearby on Metal Sonic. So, what is the radius in which someone can draw power from the emeralds without physically touching them? This has gone undefined in the Sonic series, but it must exist. After all, Sonic does not turn super anytime he wants. Having proven that emerald power does not need physical contact with the emerald itself to draw and use, I would like to bring notice to the following examples of chaos control being used with emeralds in the nearby proximity. Shadow saves Rouge with chaos control and escapes Prison Island, presumably warping all the way up to Space Colony Arc, while Rouge was across the room holding all 3 emeralds, not Shadow. Shadow fights Sonic on Arc, with both using chaos control, while Sonic has a fake emerald on him that works like a real one. The Bio Lizard uses chaos control without touching any of the 7 nearby emeralds, warping itself all the way from the core to the Eclipse Cannon's tip, where it merges itself with the Arc. And no, they were not turned off, as Sonic and Shadow both use them to turn super immediately after, and again without touching any of them. Meanwhile, Knuckles just stands there looking stupid. Then Final Hazard continues using the power of the emeralds despite them being on the Super Hogs. Sonic even remarks on it. Metal Overlord continues the growing list of drawing power from the emeralds to use chaos control without touching them, as they were all on Team Super, as does Devil Doom while all the emeralds are on Super Shadow. The Chaos Emeralds can also be artificially copied by technology. Though such fake emeralds would not be as powerful as a real one, Tails created one in Sonic Adventure 2, and because it had the same wavelength and properties as a real emerald, it could be used for chaos control. And according to Rouge's report on the truth of 50 years ago, released in the Japanese Sonic Adventure 2 official game guide, Professor Gerald's research into the emeralds resulted in the creation of chaos drives. Because the drives were created to test the application of an emerald's infinite energies to life, it is possible they too serve as fake emeralds. Although there is more to explain about the Chaos Emeralds, with that short and quick understanding, let's get back to chaos control. So, chaos control, as it has been defined many times, is the ability to use the power of a Chaos Emerald to warp time and space. This means that chaos control requires the power of the emerald. The power of the emeralds is so ingrained in the chaos control that to warp time and space without one cannot even be considered chaos control. Official quotes prove this definition. Shadow's profile in the Sonic Adventure 2 manual says, Shadow has a special ability called Chaos Control, which allows him to warp time and space using Chaos Emeralds. During the game, Sonic says it's not his speed, he must be using Chaos Emerald to warp. Later, Shadow says, it was a Chaos Emerald, wasn't it? But there's no way you could have activated Chaos Control using an emerald that's fake. When Shadow returns in Sonic Heroes, Shadow's profile in the manual says he can use a technique known as Chaos Control to distort time and space using Chaos Emeralds. Later, in the 2006 Sonic the Hedgehog game, Shadow says, with the Chaos Emerald's power, I control time and space. And Shadow's profile in the Sonic Rivals manual says, possessing the power to use Chaos Emeralds to perform Chaos Control, he has the ability to manipulate time and space. Later, in the Sonic Rivals 2 game, Shadow complains, if only I had a Chaos Emerald, I could use Chaos Control to work out of here. Then, in Shadow's profile on Sonic Channel, it says, using the Chaos Emeralds gives Shadow the ability to warp space-time, Chaos Control. While Google Translate translates the same profile as, he is given the ability to Chaos Control by distorting space-time using the Chaos Emeralds. More recently, in the Sonic Twitter Takeover 3 at 1 minute 47 seconds, a question for Shadow is asked, could you, Shadow, explain the science behind the Chaos Control technique? Shadow answers, hold the Chaos Emerald, shout Chaos Control, go fast. Admittedly, this is a mostly joking video, but still an acknowledgement of the need for an emerald. And in the just-released Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog, the player has the option to ask the question, can they Chaos Control the bomb egg away? And Rouge answers, we need a Chaos Emerald to do that. Rouge is partners with and one of the characters closest to Shadow in Team Dark. She is a highly trained government agent and spy. It would be strategically imperative she know about her partner's abilities, strengths, and weaknesses. She would need to know such information about Chaos Control. And in the just-released BIOS for the Fast Friends Forever campaign, Shadow's BIOS says, Shadow has a rare ability called Chaos Control. By utilizing the power of the Chaos Emerald, he can stop time and appear to warp to a new position instantaneously. Even in the Shadow 101 brief history, narrated as an Eggman data log, it is stated that by tapping into the power of Chaos Emerald, Shadow can warp space and time. These quotes are so indisputable at this point, but we still have some so-called word of God from the person who is both the head of Sonic Team and the main creator of Shadow's character himself saying so.
They'd like to know, does Shadow the Hedgehog need a Chaos Emerald to use Chaos Control, or can he use Chaos Control without any emeralds?
カオスコントロールはカオスエメラルドを持ってないと使えないです。
If he doesn't have the Chaos Emeralds, he cannot use Chaos Control. There it is!
These quotes are pretty clear that everyone, including Shadow, does need a Chaos Emerald to use Chaos Control. But, the Sonic fanbase being what it is, I'm sure there are still those that are not convinced yet, and they have examples they feel prove otherwise. Although what I've already put forth explains away the majority of these examples, I'm going to take down a few of these I've already heard anyway. But before beginning, it needs to be pointed out that when Chaos Control was first introduced alongside Shadow, it was indisputable that Shadow needed an emerald to use the technique. That means that opposing examples need to establish that there was a change to canon, which also means that the need for an emerald must be looked at in the strongest position of status quo. For example, there are non-canon gameplay mechanics in the Sonic series that can just be hand-waved or ignored. You know, like the extra life system or Amy stealing Espio's invisibility in Sonic 06. Is there anyone seriously arguing Amy must be part chameleon or something? No way that's canon. Heck, Chaos Control needs an emerald so bad, Sonic Team accidentally created an 8th emerald in Sonic Heroes. If the player uses Team Dark's Team Blast before collecting their first emerald, Shadow pulls out a Chaos Emerald out of thin air. Or out of Omega's robotic genitals compartment? Did Omega just... But Shadow's team should not have any emeralds, so where did this come from? We can only say it was either just a non-canon gameplay and mechanic, or we can hand-wave it as another fake emerald similar to the one Tails had in Sonic Adventure 2. So now, as we finally get to those alleged examples of Shadow not needing an emerald, we also need to realize that anytime there is ambiguity, we need to consider the intent of Sonic Team and the status quo that Chaos Control needs the power of an emerald in the strongest possible light. Remember, if Sonic Team keeps saying a Chaos Emerald is necessary for Chaos Control, there must be a reason for that. That said, here are examples I've come across. The first claim deals with how Shadow uses Chaos Control during the last wave level of his self-titled game, despite Black Doom clearly taking all the emeralds away from him. How is Shadow able to draw power from them? Distance. When Doom leaves, he only floats away. Doom is not faster than Shadow, but knows his way around the Black Comet, and can float to areas Shadow cannot reach. This leaves the location of Doom and the emeralds as ambiguous. But because the Sonic series keeps saying that Chaos Control requires at least one emerald, we must assume Doom never gets far enough away from Shadow to cut Shadow off from the emeralds. Heck, Doom can be on the other side of the nearest wall, and this cannot be disproven. Next claim is how, while no emeralds are visible, Shadow uses Chaos Control in the opening of his story in Sonic 06. Although Shadow does not call out his move, that is proven unnecessary, and it is similar to other uses of Chaos Control. Most importantly, Sega clearly considers this to be Chaos Control. How can this follow the need for an emerald's power? There is still Chaos Drives. Like how I pointed out before, Chaos Drives were created to test the application of the Chaos Emerald's infinite energies to life. Chaos Drives do indeed fuel other Chaos powers during the rest of Shadow's gameplay here, and they are used by Eggman and his robots in this game, a large number of which Shadow just destroyed. And again, because the series keeps saying Chaos Control requires an emerald, the need for an emerald must be looked at in the strongest possible light. If there is any chance it follows this rule, it must be taken as fact. The fact that Chaos Drives might serve as fake emeralds cannot be overlooked. Therefore, because Shadow has an emerald-like power source right there, means that we must assume he is using it, and thus the need for a Chaos Emerald is met. Another counter-argument example is how Shadow gives his emerald to the Gizoid Emerald, so the emerald has all 7 emeralds. What in the world did they just say? Then Shadow uses Chaos Control or techniques derived from Chaos Control during gameplay without an emerald on him. Yet every time he does so, Emerald is right there holding all of the emeralds himself. Again, there is no need for physical contact with an emerald to draw power, therefore the distance argument wins out easily. Literally every fight Shadow participates in after giving his emerald to Emerald is against the robot himself. Thus the emeralds are all right there to draw power. But fans who want Shadow to no longer need an emerald for Chaos Control really love to point out how Shadow says he, quote, no longer needs it, but Shadow never mentions Chaos Control. So, if the rule that Chaos Control needs an emerald is followed, why would Shadow talk about no longer needing his emerald in such a way? Well, Shadow might not mention Chaos Control, but he does talk about his body not being healed completely before. Indeed, Shadow was injured earlier in the story. This injury led to Shadow passing out and Rouge being forced to drag him around. He then gets beaten in fights by other characters he considers weaker, like Tails, and continually complains he is not at full power yet. So, in the context of how he spoke about his injury in relation to the emerald he was giving Emerald alongside the rest of the story, he was using the emerald as a metaphorical crutch for his injury to strengthen himself in battle while he healed, and now he no longer needed his crutch, as he had reached a point where his memory of Maria would be enough to strengthen himself. And finally, Sonic Forces. Once again, Shadow uses Chaos Control without an emerald visible, just like in Sonic 06. The Chaos Emeralds never appear in the entire story, and so are completely unaccounted for. There does not appear to be any Chaos Drives popping out of the Eggman robots, although in this example, he does not call out the move. Later in the story, he does indisputably call out Chaos Control. But like I said, the rule that Chaos Control needs an emerald must be looked at in the strongest light. It has been said so many times before, and even after this, that Shadow needs an emerald for Chaos Control. It is possible this is a mistake made in the story. However, a mistake in the story does not necessarily change canon. Indeed, Sonic Team has made an admission of the existence of mistakes, and they have now hired lore managers to keep track of the continuity. But even this seeming mistake can be explained away, because the location of the emeralds during this time cannot be verified. It is possible he has a real emerald on him. Heck, he may even have his own fake emerald on him at this point. And it's not as if the Phantom replica is the Shadow, despite having power equal to the original Shadow who are using Chaos Control. The continued use of language specifically stating that Shadow needs a Chaos Emerald, or at least a fake emerald, for Chaos Control means that it must always be considered in the context that an emerald is needed. The language used by Shadow and other characters, Sonic Team itself in profiles, and Shadow's own creator, just blatantly saying Shadow needs an emerald is just indisputable. And any argument that they should be ignored as being wrong is just plain absurd. The fans cannot possibly know more about the lore than the lore's creators. If your understanding of the lore is different than what both the creators of the lore and the characters inside the lore are telling you, then you need to re-evaluate your understanding. Obviously, there are other versions of Shadow and Chaos Control, many of which do not need a Chaos Emerald, such as in the Archie comics, Sonic Boom, and the Paramount movies. Yet there are versions, such as Sonic X and Sonic Prime, where the need for an emerald is adapted. It is, of course, also possible that the main game version of Shadow will be changed or retconned in the future to remove the need for a Chaos Emerald for Chaos Control. This is a fictional universe after all. And now, Ian Flynn, a former writer for Archie Sonic, the head writer for IDW Sonic Comics, and a proponent of Shadow not needing an emerald, is now one of the writers for Sonic Team itself. However, his views, if they have not changed, clearly have not yet taken over the rest of Sonic Team's writers. Yet. Although, if Sonic Team are indeed merging IDW Sonic Comics into the canon of the games, and making Sonic Prime canon to them as well.
If I still had that Chaos Emerald, I could have teleported out of here, but it's lost to the void.
Huh, with all this stuff coming out saying Shadow needs an emerald after Ian got the job, maybe Ian won't pull the trigger on that. Wait, what's this? Written by Ian Flynn. No Chaos Control in the past where he has no emerald. Quickly established that he has a Chaos Emerald in the present. And then bam the absolute hell out of Chaos Control during the rest of the story and the gameplay. Even changed the established canon of Sonic Generations so that Shadow can keep an emerald on him the whole time. Maybe I was wrong about Ian, perhaps he did. Well, I guess Ian did use the opportunity to change one thing. Apparently BioLizard and Shadow's bodies are now fake Chaos Emeralds. Are they somehow turning thoughts into power too? Before this, there was no official word saying any such thing. There was only the circular reasoning by fans that their belief that Chaos Control and related abilities do not require an emerald means that Shadow's body must itself be a fake emerald, producing emerald power. Though here Ian says that they just don't have enough energy on their own for Chaos Control, so they still need an emerald, at least for that. Of course, Ian can change that in the future too. But until such a time, the status quo is that Shadow the Hedgehog absolutely requires a Chaos Emerald or a fake emerald to use his Chaos Control technique. Personally, I would prefer it not change because the Murder of Sonic game also shows why such a change is a bad idea, as it would have broken the story or required the creation of an overly convenient plot device. Thank you for listening to my rant and ramble. This is my first video ever, and I'm kind of a quiet and shy person, so my apologies for sounding a little off. Hopefully you found it informative. Like and share, please. Alright, I just want to add that I might have went a little harsh on Ian Flynn in the video. I do respect him, and though I disagree with a few of his changes and stories, others were true improvements. Okay, I'm done now.